Some would say that we are currently living in a golden age of board gaming. With the advent of Kickstarter reducing the barriers to entry for first-time and small press publishers, and over 1,000 new games being released at the Eschen Spiel this year, just one of the industry's trade shows, there has never been more board games on the market and more great games to choose from. Even companies that have historically produced other forms of entertainment seem to now be getting into the board game. Such is the case with the premier effort by Riot Games, Mechs vs. Minions. Now, Riot Games is the developer of the wildly popular League of Legends video game. But does their video game design know-how really carry over into the analog realm? Or will this publisher's freshman effort suffer from the same pitfalls that so many other first-time board game publishers do? Well, let's find out today as we take a look at Mechs vs. Minions to discover if it's a mash-up masterpiece or a misaligned mess. We'll find out if Mechs vs. Minions gets its wings today. In Mechs vs. Minions, 1 to 4 players will each take the controls of a different mech, operating it throughout a series of missions by programming it with a series of cards, each of which will determine when and how much the mechs turn, move, and attack. So, at its core, Mechs vs. Minions is really a programming game, in the same vein as Robo Rally or Volt Robot Battle Arena. And additionally, as with those other Robo-Programo games, the commands that players painstakingly program into their mech to control it will inevitably go awry as the mech takes damage and encounters other things that cause it to malfunction. The game fosters an environment of controlled chaos, so if you want to be constantly in complete control of executing your strategy throughout a game, you will be sorely disappointed here. But if you're willing to partake on a wild ride and continually react and readjust to the changing game state, then this game will more than keep you on your toes. Another thing that will keep you on your toes? The game's components. Included in this game are pre-painted mech figures, 100 ink-washed minions, 1 big plastic bomb, 4 crystal shards, various metal tokens, a deck of 96 command cards, a deck of 55 damage cards, 5 double-sided map tiles, 4 player boards, various dice, a minute glass, vacuum-formed storage trays, and several surprises, including 10 secret mission envelopes that each include additional components and introduce new rules that continue to evolve the game as you complete them. That's a lot of stuff. So this is obviously designed to be a premium hobby board game. However, it is relevant to mention that Riot has taken the approach of distributing the game themselves. Why? Well, because by selling direct to the public through their website instead of working through a distributor, this means that the game will only be available through their website and not at other online retailers or at your friendly local game store. But as the result of this approach, Riot has been able to maintain a $75 price point for this game. So, while the gameplay is designed to be fast and furiously fun, its components are definitely top-notch, and the price point is certainly alluring, all of these positives can be undermined if the execution of the game suffers from the same pitfalls caused by the inexperience shared by so many other first-time and non-board game publishers. So, what kind of impact does this have on the usability and enjoyment of this game? Well, when I played it with my game group, there certainly were a few kinks, which I'll get to in a moment. But first I wanted to mention that one of the things Riot emphasized in interviews about their approach to the game design is that they wanted the opening of the box to give the same feeling as like unwrapping a present. They wanted players to get really excited about diving right into playing. So that's what I did during my playtesting. Instead of reading through the rulebook, my group and I instead reached right for the tutorial booklet, set up the introductory game, and jumped right into playing. I wanted to see if we would be able to start playing this game without cracking open that rulebook. If I was actually opening a present, I'd want to dive right into playing with it instead of first slogging through all of the rules. So I wanted to see if my group and I were able to do so. And we were. Now, by not reading the rulebook before we started our first play session, we did, of course, miss a few minor details that we had to look up as we went along. But we didn't encounter anything that prevented us from continuing to play. For example, after getting a few turns into the game, we temporarily became disheartened by the lack of a current player token. We realized the game really could have used one. But this disappointment was short-lived, as we soon discovered documentation that specifically instructed us that the minute glass is also to be used as the current player marker. And this was an experience that we had over and over and over again with the game. Nearly every time we thought we encountered something that was either missing or unexplained, boom! 5 seconds later, it was explained or we found it in the documentation. In fact, due to the way that we approached learning the game by diving right into the tutorial missions, my fellow players mentioned that they really liked the way that new rules were slowly introduced to us as we continued through the tutorial and its missions. It felt like playing a video game tutorial, which completely made sense considering who Mechs and Minions is developed by. However, while the documentation was very well written and helped ease players into the game and introduce new game mechanisms and concepts at appropriate intervals, the game's documentation is also where I encountered the greatest points of potential problems. Now, to be clear, these were not game-breaking problems. They seemed more like issues caused simply by inexperience. They remind me of the type of lessons that Wizards of the Coast has learned over the years by refining and improving the language that they use on Magic the Gathering cards. If you compare the verbiage used on the first edition of Magic cards versus those printed today, well, you'll see that they have learned very important lessons on what information to include, even if redundant, and how to communicate ideas consistently among an entire library of cards that can both complement and contradict each other. By comparison, there were some instances in the card text in Mechs and Minions that required us to stop several times and decide what we thought the card's intent was. Most of these issues were probably caused out of necessity due to space limitations on the cards, but it was sometimes unclear when some movement or attack was optional or required, or what the minimum or maximums should be. The fix for this would be to always indicate whether a card affects a specific minimum or maximum number of targets or range. And personally, I think this is simply a side effect of the game designer inexperience and is, fortunately, something that Riot could easily remedy by providing a detailed card glossary or FAQ on their website. I think the most difficult thing in the game to understand and perform correctly is a mech's ability to tow another mech or object. Now, between the 4 players, there were 2 or 3 different interpretations of how the towing rule was to be executed, and we had to discuss it before we finally settled on a house rule for it. But again, this is something that would be simple to clarify by providing some additional examples or a FAQ on their website. So, with that in mind, were the spots of ambiguous documentation enough to sour the experience and prevent Mechs and Minions from getting its wings? Well, I'm happy to say quite the opposite, actually. Even with those minor rules quibbles, my group's experience with this game was still extremely positive. The group that I played it with unanimously requested that we play Mechs and Minions again the next time that we get together. Heck, even just recording this review is making me want to play it again right now. In my opinion, the components, the graphic design, the mechanisms, the fun factor, and the value for the price are all exceptional. So, if you're willing to embrace a little controlled chaos and don't mind the random monkey wrench being thrown into your well-laid plans every now and again, then grab a copy of this game while you can. This is not a case of a company with a popular intellectual property trying to cash in by farting out some half-baked merchandise with their logo stamped on it. No. There was a lot of thought and care and craftsmanship that was put into Mechs and Minions by its designers, and it shows. Even with some of the room for improvement that results from the first-time publisher's inexperience, the quality still shows. And if this game is something that you feel like you'd enjoy, then yes, it is totally worth it. Hope this helps. I'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.
As we take a look at Mechs vs. Minions to discover if it's a mash-up masterpiece or magnificently maligned mess. Like that sentence was. Mess.